Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out on a night like this. Good to see so many faces and so many new faces. My name's Robert Gunn, part of Alberni Climate Action, and I acknowledge that we're meeting this evening on land that was given by Governor Douglas to the Anderson Company in 1859 without any consultation with the Sishat or Hupachasset. It was all 4,000 acres plus another 14,000 of timberlands at a very reasonable price in today's money. So I would like to know a bit about our audience tonight. So the first question is, how many of you are renters? Not too many tenants, okay. Does that mean the majority of the rest of you are in fact homeowners in, by and large, single detached houses? Yeah, okay. Well, let's simplify things a little bit. How many have any interest from a landlord perspective that you might own? Okay. Very good. Is there anything else I needed to cover, Keith? No. So I'm now going to introduce Keith Whiten, who will moderate the panel, and he will introduce the panel, and we're off and cooking without gas.
Well, thank you, Robert. So I think we're in for a real treat tonight. We had an organizing meeting a few weeks ago, and it was really exciting because we're very fortunate to have 3 experts in energy, building and energy in Port Alberni, who each of them have expertise, and they have achieved, significant advances really in dealing with energy issues around housing and other buildings. So I'd like to introduce them to you. Mike Ruttan is the chair or the leader of the group Alberni Low Energy Housing, and they recently built the new apartment on Maitland, and it's turned out to be a very exciting project, and we're going to hear all about it, and Mike's going to be a very good advocate for some of the techniques and issues that are achievable. And then we have Tessa Hall. Tessa is she has a company called Ecolibrium Energy Solutions. Not only does she have a business that she is an energy consultant, but she bought an older home in Port Alberni and has spent the last few years putting her theory and what she does in her professional life, into application on her own home. So that's really interesting because most of the homes in Port Alberni are older in a sense. So it's what we can do and what makes sense with an older home that we can do. So that's going to be really great. And then George Koning recently built a net zero home in Port Alberni, basically a totally new build from the ground up. And so George has, through the experience, George has developed a great, I guess, idea, or he's a great resource for what techniques and materials are available in the new build market. And also each of them have experience and can advise around the cost, like what's the cost benefit of all these different possibilities. So what we're going to do is we're going to give each of them, we'll start with Mike, Tessa, and George. We're going to give them 15 minutes for their little spiel. So I want you to keep track of your questions, and then we're going to open it for discussion. And they'll try to, customize their talk for the audience, so that we don't have that many renters, although it is an important issue in Port Alberni, how we can improve the housing stock for the renting public. So we'll get started, and thank you for being here, and thank you especially for the panel for coming and giving us their expertise. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Yes, and thank you, Keith, for your introduction. I do chair the board for the Alberni Low Energy Housing Society, and we're called that not because we don't have a lot of energy, We have it. We're called that because we're energy misers, or we believe in energy efficiency. And you know, this was an idea that we started we incorporated as a society in 2010. And we just thrashed around for 6 years trying to figure out how to do it and how to find the building, but more importantly, how to get the money to put this dream that we had into reality. And in 2016, we met the area director for BC Housing, an amazing lady named Donna Money, who's since retired. And she shared our dream. And she said, you know what? I'll help you get the money. You find the building. So our first building that we bought, and we knew nothing. We had no idea how to put all this together. But we've had the money. We felt we could get enough money to buy this old apartment building on 14th Avenue, 14th and Bird. A building built in 1946. Well, in 1946, all Canada cared about was getting buildings up as quickly as possible because after the war, you needed places for people to live. We did not care about energy efficiency in 1946. And so, how do you take a building built in 1946 and make it as energy efficient as we dreamed about? We got some money additional money from BC Housing to put lipstick on the pig and move some things around and make it more habitable and give every suite its own bathroom. But to really make it energy efficient is a daunting task, especially for a building of that age. And it's something we're still working on. And fortunately, we had a meeting with Canadian CMHC, Canadian Mortgage and Housing. And they do have some programs that can help us. So if you're involved in a society that's thinking about this, CMHC could be a great partner. So then we felt we needed to do something and start from scratch, build something new. And we came up with the idea of an apartment building in partnership with BC Housing, and it needed to be energy efficient right from day one. We also needed to do a look at a scan of our community and what was the need. And at that time, the greatest need was housing for families. It still remains a really, really significant need in this community. And how could we do this in a way that was energy efficient and great to live in and be able to create the sense of community, which is really important for us as a society. We have to, having all these people live together, they become a community. You are reliant on one another, you're sharing the same building, the same footprint, and so on and so forth. How do you create that? Well, good quality housing and growing your own food. And that's what's really important. Food. People talk about food. People talk about how can they make their place better. So in both of our buildings, we have community gardens. So the Maitland Street Village that we built, 45,000 square feet, 46 units, 31 of them are 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom. So those are the ones that are intended. There's 31 of them. They're intended for families. We have 3 2-bedrooms and 12 1-bedroom suites. The building has 3 levels of rent. Each suite can rent for, depends whether it's 1, 2, or 3-bedroom, but they can rent at what's called deep subsidy. The suite can rent at affordable, or the suite can rent at market pricing. Just depends on the level of income of the people who are coming in that building. We put up the Maitland Street housing project for $235 a square foot, which in today's world is amazing. And I don't know whether you noticed or not, but it seemed like for months that building was wrapped in blue. It's called blue skin. That stops the air from going in and out. And then on the outside of that goes, I think they were 3 foot by 3 foot, possibly 4 foot by 4 foot, insulating, two layers of insulation, rock wool, and then cover on that, and then put a hardy plank on the outside of that, and I think about 10 inches of insulation, styrofoam insulation on the roof. Each suite has its own heat pump. Each suite is responsible for its own electricity. And each suite is individually metered. So if you happen to be a tenant in that building and you have a 3-bedroom suite, your electricity runs you between $20 and $25 a month. As a society, we are responsible for all of the hot water in the building. There's no fossil fuels used in this building whatsoever. It's all electric. So we're responsible for all the hot water. We're responsible for the electricity for 3 sets of laundries. We're responsible for the heating and cooling in the main part of the building, the elevators, the security cameras, all that stuff. Our first electric bill for January and February was $525. So 45,000 square feet, $525. The electric bill for May and June, starting to get a little warmer, $460. Just before this morning, I checked just to see what the daily cost of electricity is for us as a society. $6.11 a day. So go and check your own at home and see what it's costing you. So I can't say it enough. 45,000 square foot building. So the point is that if we plan for this and we've got the right windows, the right insulation, you know, we don't incorporate any thermal breaks and all that kind of stuff. We're really careful about the insulation. We can achieve this, and we can achieve it at a price that we can afford. Because when we first proposed this, talked to various contractors locally, and they said, yeah, but it's going to cost you way more to put it up. No. Well, it's going to cost you way more to operate it. No. We can do this. We have the technology. And because of the way the building is designed, it's not passive, but it's not active either. It's just good insulation. Every suite has its own HVAC. There's constantly air circulating from within the suite to the outside. It's got these big units on the roof of the house, but each suite has its own. And the moisture's taken out, but the heat's put back into the suite. And you know, we had suites that had never been rented even by June, so we never had the heat on. And those suites, the temperature in those suites, even in June, with the heat never having been on, was just the same constant 18 degrees. It was 18 degrees in January, 18 degrees in June, it was 18 degrees in August. It's just, so you've probably heard about a blower test. The engineering firm that put this together did what's called a blower test on the building just to check on that transfer of air from inside to outside and outside to inside, just to see how the level of energy efficiency it is. And the engineering firm that did that uses the data when they go and present at passive house conferences elsewhere in North America, because the data for our building is just so impressive that they want to use it elsewhere. So the building itself is, like I said, it's incredibly energy efficient. It was built on the basis of stacking grants. So we got some money from the provincial government, $4.6 million. We got some money from CMHC, $1.98 million. And then we got an extra grant because of federal largesse of about $2.35 million. We have a $16.8 million building, and we're just about to take out the mortgage on it, and it's just going to be slightly over $5 million. So again, as a society, there are these monies available to make these things happen. So it's up to you as a society to go and find those sources of funds and put them all together and stack them. It's possible. Take advantage of what's there. It takes some energy, it takes some digging, it takes some organization, but it's definitely worth pursuing, because in the end, we were able to build an apartment building that people love to live in. We're not getting any complaints from the neighbors about the building. And we stayed true to our vision about creating a building with landscaping around it that would reflect this area and withstand the test of time. This building is probably one of the safest buildings in Port Alberni because it's built with wider than normal foundations, and the foundations themselves sit on these 8-foot by 10-foot lily pads all around the perimeter of the building. So in the event of an earthquake, the building will kind of float. Mostly wood, super well constructed. So again, it allows to flex, but it's not going to fall down in an earthquake. It's a place of refuge. And it is the first apartment building in the entire province that's hit step 4 in the new BC building code. You hear about step 3 coming up as being, that's the target by 2032. We're at step 4, not step 5, which is passive house. But we are solar ready. We are net zero ready. We have the plan. We have wired to the parking lot that we can put in solar panels in the parking lot, create these carports, and the roof of the carport will be solar panels. We're just short of one thing: money. Need $1 million to make that happen. So it's just a matter of, okay, well, let's find where we can get that money from. So it's a great building. People love living in there. They love working together. It's a great thing. Could this be our future? Well, both buildings in some way could be our future. If you think about Canada as a whole, there are probably tens of thousands of smaller apartment buildings, even to larger apartment buildings, built post-Second World War. Well, as a society, what are we going to do? We're going to tear them all down? We're not. That doesn't make any sense. Can we retrofit them? Yes, we can. We can make it better. We can't make it perfect. We can't make it as good, make them as good as the Maitland Street Village or George's Passive House. But we can make them significantly better. And can we create a future that we want to leave for our kids and our grandkids? Absolutely. Because looking at this room here, if we don't do it, who's going to? We have the willingness, we have the interest, many of us have the time and still have the energy. We can do this. And Port Alberni can be a model for how we can do this. Do you know that Vancouver Island's largest solar array is on the roof of our hospital? I phoned to get some data on that solar array and how it was doing, and I got in touch with a fellow who was their new maintenance supervisor. He'd been there for 8 months. And he said, "What solar array?" So it just ticks along, and you can't see it from the street, and it just does its thing. And And it reduces their electrical costs as a hospital on average 35%. Wow. The solar array that we have designed for the Maitland Street Village will produce between $125,000 and $145,000 worth of electricity on an annual basis. Well, we don't consume that amount of electricity on an annual basis. So what we don't consume, we would put back into the grid. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. And thanks everyone for coming tonight. So I'm going to take my energy advisor hat off for a few minutes and talk to you as a homeowner. I bought a falling down little house right up on the corner of Argyle and Dunbar in 2016. It was a 1950s house. It had single pane wood windows. It had stucco that was falling off and almost 1,000 liters of water in the basement. And no, I did not have a pool, but it was what I could afford at the time. I was still in university. My husband was the only one working and we needed a house. This was the house for us. We had seen this house. We'd lived in the community for quite some time, working in windows and doors for Beaver Creek Home Center. We had driven past this house on many occasions and been saddened by how it had fallen down over time. The owner had gotten older and just not been able to keep up with it. It was a big house. We thought we'd bought ourselves a fixer-upper, but we did not realize how big of a job we were getting ourselves into at the time. Neither of us had never lived in a house with oil heat before. And to our great surprise, after 3 months of living in this very energy inefficient house, we realized that we'd gone through almost $3,000 in oil to heat the house. And we realized we needed some help because we were going to have to do some major renovations to this, or we could not afford to keep this house, even at the purchase price that we had it. So as an immediate fix, we contacted an HVAC company and had them come out and switch from oil heat to natural gas. At the time, from everything that the HVAC company said, we truly believed that natural gas was the best, most efficient choice on the market. And it did help us reduce our bills in the short term. But we knew that we had other upgrades that needed to be done. And we had plenty of ideas. We'd worked in the hardware industry for a long time. We knew what kind of products were out there, but we really had no idea how to put them together to do the kind of upgrades that would reduce our energy efficiency bill or energy bills over time. And so we reached out to an energy advisor. Full disclosure, I was not one at the time, and I couldn't have ever worked on my own house, so it wouldn't have been helpful. So we reached out to an energy advisor to get a better kind of benchmark of where we were at. When we had that first energy audit done, we had what Mike just described as a blower door test, an air tightness test on the house. In an average new construction house now, we are shooting for 2 to 2.5 air changes per hour. Okay, that is a measure of the amount of air leakage that you have throughout your home over an hour's basis at a really high pressure wind. It's a technical term, but go with me here, 2.5. Our house was over 17 air changes per hour. We had, in effect, the equivalent, if you were to take all those leaks and put them into one big hole, we had a 4x3 window open all the time. Summer, winter, didn't matter. It was either really hot or really cold in there. It was uncomfortable. The air was dusty. We are on a busy corner. It was too hot and too cold. It was not comfortable for us at all. And so the energy advisor kind of helped us as we were going through the house, and he pointed out different areas that were easy for us to fix going forward as far as air tightness goes, and then other things we talked about as far as upgrades down the line. Once he left, he supplied us with what we refer to in the industry as an EnerGuide label. And what that does is it gives you an idea of how your home is performing in relation to a code-built house now, and that is code minimum house now. We were using 76% of our energy in our home just on space heating, and 9.3 tons of greenhouse gas emissions were being emitted in our house just to run the heating equipment. We had electric hot water, so that was the only heat equipment and source of natural gas at that time. We decided that we definitely needed to do this. We were all in, but we didn't know exactly what to do, so we started with the basics. We started with the low-hanging fruit. We started looking at weather stripping. We caulked all of those single pane wood windows shut for the time being, because at least that would give us something. We gasketed every electrical outlet that we had. There was a chimney in the house that wasn't being used anymore, and air was just leaking through it all the time. So we used some elbow grease and we knocked it down and we sealed it. We had somebody else up on the roof, but we sealed it, and we stopped as much of that air leakage we could at the time. It wasn't a huge change, but it definitely gave us an incentive to keep going. We started to notice that our bills were getting less. By that time it was summer, so we started to feel that it wasn't as warm in the house. But then it was time to really put a plan together, which can be challenging. Having been in the building industry for as long as we had, we knew what products were available, and we started talking to electricians, we started talking to plumbers, we started talking to HVAC companies and siding companies and window companies to get an idea of what all of these things were going to cost us and how to do them in the best order possible. Everybody that came in had a different idea for us. Everybody that came in had a different priority. And some of them thought that other priorities that we had weren't as important. And so we had to really take all of that information and decide for ourselves what we thought was going to be best, and put ourselves in a position where we would do things in the best order possible to maximize what we were doing, while also considering that we had a budget. This was not an inexpensive project to do. So after taking all of those considerations into our thoughts, we went back to our energy advisor. We presented all of the information that we had, and we talked to him about what our best course of action would be going forward. In the end, we decided to take down all of the old stucco siding, which was truthfully already falling off, and insulate the house from the exterior. This might seem a little counterintuitive. I know Mike just talked about it from a commercial perspective, and on larger buildings, it's very common to do this. In renovations especially, but in residential construction, we don't see it very often. I can see why people don't think of it. It's odd to think to put your insulation on the outside of your house where it could get wet. Most exterior insulation is very hydrophobic and doesn't have any issues with being wet at all. What it essentially does is put a sweater around your house. So if you think about the way we construct nowadays, most of our insulation is interior, it's inside our walls. That would be like being cold in the winter and complaining to your mom and her telling you to drink a hot tea or eat some soup and then go outside in your t-shirt. It's not as effective as if you put a sweater on before you go out the door, or a jacket. And so we decided to do that. We decided to do the insulation, the windows, and then because we had to rip the siding off, put new siding back on at the same time. that was definitely not the least expensive job that we've done on the house. We spent a little over $30,000 in total to do that. With that and a few other upgrades inside the home, we've reduced our energy consumption by more than 70%. The other item that we did was to, once we had done all of this and we knew kind of where we were at for air tightness, where we knew where we were at for insulation levels, for comfort within the home, we took a bit of a break for a little while, spent about 12 months just kind of watching our data and our bills, because we do that once we really start to get into it. We took all that information and we decided, okay, we need cooling in this house. It's still warm. It's still 3 levels. And we decided to take advantage of some of the grants that are available from the federal government and the provincial government for heat pumps. And so just this last fall, we had a heat pump installed in the house. I can tell you that I absolutely love it, but we are now completely all electric in this house. We are down to 0.2 tons of greenhouse gas emissions from 9.3, so big jump there. And less than, we spend more energy heating the water in our home by a large margin than our actual heating or cooling for the house, just by virtue of the way electric hot water tanks work. So we still have a few more things to do. We are currently waiting for our solar install to happen. And we have not touched the attic at all because there's just too much going on up there and we just hadn't gotten to that point yet. So those are two thoughts or 2 ideas we're gonna take into the future with us. We couldn't be prouder of how this house performs now. We love the aesthetic. Part of the reason that we decided to go with exterior insulation, it's an old 1950s house, beautiful cove ceilings on the inside, textured walls. I grew up in the eastern provinces where houses are typically quite old and character is really loved and respected. And I felt that it was really important to honor the way the house was in its true form and try and keep that as much as possible. So by exterior insulating the house, we didn't have to touch any of that. We didn't have to damage it or try and recreate it in any way. We were able to just keep it in its own form. And it actually also just made it a lot easier to live in there while we were renovating. So that was helpful too. So that is a success story for a deep energy retrofit, which is what they call those when you're targeting energy efficiency as your main goal for a renovation. Putting my energy advisor hat back on. Full disclosure, there's no way we would have done this if we didn't realize that there were so many different rebates and grants that were available to us. Our energy advisor helped us a lot with that. On a federal and provincial level, there are massive amounts of funding out there for renovation upgrades. For us, so far, we have accessed just over $22,000 in rebates, with the final rebate that we're expecting is actually for the solar system. The federal government just released a 0 interest up to $40,000 loan that can be paid back over a 10-year period. That is specifically for energy efficiency upgrades. And so the solar system was not something that we'd planned on. It was always a pipe dream. It's super cool, but we didn't think we'd ever get there. It's not the least expensive thing. But with that grant in mind and that loan, once we costed out our electricity consumption, and the cost of the solar unit, we are actually going to pay the same amount per month for the loan as we would have for all of the solar panels to be installed. They will cover 95% of our electricity bill, and we're paying it back over a 10-year period in zero interest. So thinking about that and thinking about cost, yeah, I'm probably getting pretty close. Thinking about that, thinking about cost, I wanted to circle back to the beginning there. We have now had enough time to look at our electricity consumption, and I can say that the entire year's electricity for that home, including charging my car, will be less than $2,200. Less than we paid for the first 3 months of just heating the home. It was worth it.
It's good to listen to you, Tess. Actually learned a few things in a hurry. The poster doesn't accurately portray who I actually am. I am a builder, and I didn't actually build a net zero home, but I built a passive house. Now, to bring you to understand what I do and why I do it, I need to give you a little bit of background about me. At age 19, I was in trade school, came back to the valley, couldn't get an apprenticeship, wanted to build, designed a house on my dad's dining room table, bought land, and started to build. And my dad joined me as a partner in that build. And when you have a dad, you got to sometimes bend a little bit. So we framed with 2x4 walls, which was typical, and 3.5 inches of insulation in the walls. And in those days, we were only required to put 6 inches in the ceiling. And I argued with my dad all morning. I wanted to put 3.5 more inches in. He says, George, you're nuts. 2 years later, he put that amount in his own home. I then spent, I have worked in renovation and new construction for the last 5 decades. I have always been interested in energy. That first house that I did build, I did pre-plumb it for solar water heating. But in '81, the economy collapsed and I was out of work. So that never happened. In the year 2000, I bought a house on Kutsuxis Road that had the largest grow up in the Alberni Valley, 450 plants. 3.5 yards of topsoil inside, 400 pots, plus all the wiring. And I bought it basically for the land value. That home was bought in May. The windows were taken out, the stucco was taken off. The interior was stripped of 11,000 square feet of drywall. All the wiring came out, all the plumbing came out, and I was left with a shell. Over the next 18 months, first I twin framed the exterior walls. So you typically the house in 1965, you frame with a 2x4 exterior wall. I created a 3.5 inch gap, and then I put an interior frame. But instead of the typical 16-inch spacing, I went to 24. That allowed 12 inches of fiberglass insulation in the walls. In the attic, I put 24 inches of insulation in. I also phoned the gas company who only 2 years before had hooked up that site to gas. I says, come get your meter and pull up the piping. They were flabbergasted. And they said, what are you going to do? I says, I'm going to put in electric. You're nuts. I says, just do it. So when that home was completed, the annual heating cost was about 80 cents a square foot. So in other words, for about $2,000 a year, that was the entire heating. So it had a 60-gallon hot water tank in it, a 5-gallon hot water tank in it, baseboard heating throughout, and it was 2,900 square feet of living space. And there was a double gate garage where I did cabinetry occasionally in, or projects. So you think of a table saw with a 3 horsepower motor, that type of stuff. That was in my shop. From there, you should understand, I come out of a family where my mother went into care at the age of 56. She had MS. She was trapped in my parents' home. My dad had built a beautiful house in 67, but she couldn't get out of it. In 2011, I retrofitted a basement suite on Fifth Avenue for a man who had muscular dystrophy. He was trapped in his basement. He couldn't go anywhere. He hadn't been out of there for 4 months. That drove me to have the desire to build an accessible home as well as an energy efficient home. I started this study in 2015 by going through the internet and the other avenue that where I could get information. And I went on the journey to design a passive house. I looked up a company in Victoria who then took my drawings, put them in a software from Germany to determine the energy needs. And I wanted to hit the passive house standard. They phoned me back on the second day they had the prints. George, you're almost there. We've never seen anybody try this like this. So over a period of 4 to 5 months, back and forth, we tweaked the design. And it had to do with how big the windows were, in terms of their orientation, how much insulation there was, and so on. I then started to look for land. I bought 3 lots on Gertrude Street. Originally, what I had in mind there, I wanted to do a 6-plex. But when you go to a 6-plex, you must involve an architect. And that's prohibitive. And I didn't want to go there. And then I thought, okay, if I got to go there, at least then see if there's grants for the private entrepreneur. Well, there are none. Whatever a politician tells you, there is no money for the private guy. I'm going to give you a quick understanding of what a passive house really is like. Think of a styrofoam coffee cup with a plastic lid. You know the ones we used to drink out of? We're not allowed to anymore. So think of that cup tipped on its side, the plastic being your window facing south. Think of that cup as a continuous envelope that's super tight, basically watertight, and it's also an insulation package. And then think of 2 straws going in, side by side, tight. The one straw draws in fresh air. As a result, you're also pumping out moist, stale air. And when the 2 pass each other, there's a heat transfer. In essence, that's what you're aiming for when you build a passive house. Tess just talked about how tight her house was before she started. And she accurately portrays what a typical Port Alberni house of that vintage is like. In other words, basically she was losing the entire volume of air in that house probably every 4 to 5 minutes. That's incredible, eh? I'm just going to borrow this.
I get burnt toast in the pocket. It takes minutes to clear out the whole.
To give you an idea what I was chasing, see these 2 cards? If you add up all the gaps in my house, it would cover this area. That's it. In other words, when the next tsunami comes, my house will float away. So that's kind of the standard you're chasing. Now, the standard also requires you to use electricity. Great. but you're restricted in how much you can use. 1 watt per square foot. To give you an idea, there's no furnace in this house. There is a little electric coil in that air-to-air exchanger that I just talked about. Those 2 tubes. And it has the output of a hairdryer. And then also I have 1 2-foot baseboard in the house as additional backup. So when I did the design, I was told I would need no backup heat other than that coil in the air-to-air exchanger. But a seasoned professional from one of the companies that I bought material took me aside and said, George, sometimes these guys are out a little bit. Better put in 1 baseboard. And I'm glad I did. The total energy bill for that house, that's heat, hot water, light, the energy needed to run the HRV, less than $800 a year. The last 4 months, the daily cost on that house to operate, $1.16. When I hit those numbers, I had looked 5 years ago at putting a solar array. It didn't make economic sense. What I just hear that Tessa is allowed to do now, that wasn't possible. I might reconsider that now. But the other point is, this is my big concern. Housing has become so unaffordable. If you got to add $40,000 to a purchase price on a house because of the solar array, most of us can't get that kind of borrowing power. That means the family income is stretched in the wrong direction. And that does concern me. Now, to deal with the elephant in the room, everybody's going to ask me how much it costs. This is what I've learned as a builder over the years. There's no such thing as a price per square foot. It's a useless number because every site is different. Every roof line is different. Everybody's taste is different. Somebody wants granite. Somebody else will do a laminate. Somebody else says, I got to have a high ceiling, and on it goes. I built this house for the same cost as an ordinary house. To give you an idea how this house is constructed, Mike described the big building that they have built, that apartment building. I believe, Mike, those walls are about a foot thick on that building, roughly? Okay. The walls on my home are 20 inches thick. That's all rock wool insulation. Okay? So roughly an R value of R70. There are triple pane windows that are installed mid-wall, and that is because you want to prevent a wind wash effect, which takes away heat. The majority of the windows are very carefully oriented to the south. There's low E glass as well. The water distribution in that house has been done with a manifold in such a way that you have single runs for every tap and faucet. And you have the smallest diameter pipe that you need so that you don't run the water forever to get hot water. That's the advantage of that. The hot water tank is a Ream hot water tank, one that's a double-walled plastic filled with foam. They are the new generation. They do save a fair amount on heat loss, but they are not really what they claim to be. Mine is 2.5 years old, and it blew both elements. And the kicker is these elements are expensive. Between the two elements was $400. A normal hot water tank element might be $50 per element. There is another type of hot water heat system, and it's done with a heat pump. That's made in Australia. The house is actually pre-plumbed for that. I just didn't simply want to shell out $5,000 at the time to do it. The price will drop, but that particular heat pump is able to operate at 20 degrees below zero because it uses CO2 gas. Highly efficient. So in other words, another benefit of that particular design, for every dollar you put in to operate it, you may get as much as $5 worth of heat in the water. Really good deal. I have approximately 30 inches of insulation in the attic for a value of about R90. What else can I tell you? Oh, the accessibility features that I desired. So from the curb to the interior of the house, there's no more than a quarter of an inch per foot incline. The entry doors have all low thresholds. Every room is accessible with a wheelchair. Every door is 3 feet wide. Every room is equipped with light switches that are 4 inches lower than normal. The electrical outlets are 4 inches higher. Every door is offset from a corner by at least 1 foot, so that if you're sitting in a wheelchair, when you grab the latch, you don't fall out of the wheelchair. There is a dedicated wet room in this home that you could either independently shower in there, or if you need a caregiver, no problem. There will be no risk for the caregiver. It is also possible in this home to put in a lift to lift somebody in and out of bed. The garage is dimensions that are 16 by 28 feet. As a result, you can drive a full-size van, and you can discharge a person from the side or the back and navigate that garage. So in short, that's what I built. I'm going to leave it there. And I guess what we could do is open up a discussion in terms of building materials and what I favor and what I don't. But I'm going to leave it there for the moment.
Well, thank you. That's really amazing. It's so encouraging and exciting, really, to have this level of skill and expertise in our community. So thank you very much. So I want you guys just to field your questions now. And what we'd ask is if you'd come up and speak it into the mic, because we're recording this and it will be broadcast on social media and other venues. So please, if you have comments or questions, I'm just going to open the floor. We have a small enough group here. We can just have a go around with comments and questions. So thank you.
Just out of curiosity, you've got a bill recently for a piece of record. Did you notice that your energy consumption was down quite a bit? No? Yeah, because ours said it was down 30% over the same period last year, so I was just wondering how many other, just for our own personal service. Curious.
Can I like this? Not like this, but like this. Yeah. Check, check.
Check, check, check.
I think yours is on.
Is it now?
Yeah.
So my first question, I have one for Tessa and one for George. So I used to live on Dunbar Street, so I know very well the house you're talking about, and I've watched the amazing renovations you've done there. It's really impressive. So you talked about you're interested in installing solar, and because of your site, that's quite a challenge, I would imagine, for solar installation. So I'd wonder if you could address that.
Absolutely. So yes, it's a character house, and character houses have a lot of roof lines. So I don't have an optimal layout. We are primarily west and south facing. We are on a corner, so we can capture energy from both sides. I looked at four different solar companies and had them all give me their best approximation of what we would do. Some of them got really creative. They were putting stuff on the north and east sides to try and maximize the amount that they could get me producing. In the end, I thought that simple was best. We wanted it to look good. We didn't want it to look patchy all over the place. We really love the aesthetic of the home, and we didn't want it to look like we threw a whole bunch of solar panels on there. We wanted it to look like it fit in. But we also wanted to get the best bang for our buck that we could out of it. And so we ended up we're going to come down the Dunbar side and then just one section of roof line on the Argyle side.
So your roof line doesn't come down on the Dunbar side, does it? Right.
Yep. So here. So we're going to come down this side and then down this section of the roof here.
So to me, this is the Dunbar side.
Ah, okay. Yeah, well, I guess we're kind of on that corner. So yeah.
Anyway, I understand. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that is still going to give you, because you have so many trees around giving a lot of shade there, you're still going to get decent efficiency?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a lot of trees in that area on the frontage of our house. Let's just call it that. Those are all deciduous trees. So we'll be able to access the free solar that's going to be coming from them in the wintertime months when when the sun is lower, there quite easily. On the west face, we're fairly clear. We don't really have any tree coverage on that. The two areas that do have quite a bit of tree coverage are the ones that weren't very effective anyways. So it actually did work out fairly well for us that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And George, I was interested in you talking about your hot water delivery, and you went with those individual lines, and I was wondering about why you didn't choose to do an on-demand delivery system.
I come from the principle, keep it simple. Okay? But here's a couple of things that might help understand what I did. So remember, this house is on slab, basically, in a roundabout way. The slab has 12 inches of foam below it. I ran all my hot water lines in the foam. So to minimize the heat loss. Sounds good. And I also ran the cold lines in the sand below the foam. So you want cold water, you get cold water, right? That's what you want. The effect of the foam is a fantastic insulator, but it can affect to some degree the delivery of hot water. So I only have one particular place where I have a little bit of difficulty, and that is at the kitchen sink. And I intend to put in a recirculator pump. And there's also ones out now with a little bit of an electronic gizmo that it will activate it at the time of day that you need it. I'm not particularly interested in that. I just want it simple and to operate. Get that hot water when you need it. Yeah, these are the learning curves that you got. So the whole thing with doing what I did is putting your money where your mouth is. And the reality is you're a risk taker when you step out and do this for the first time. So to give you an idea how new what I was doing, I had to take courses in order to keep a contractor's license. So I'd find myself in Nanaimo in the audience of probably the best engineer in all of BC when it comes to building stuff. He's the guy who termed condo syndrome, which we famously have had to deal with for so many years. And he figured out what was going wrong. And he one time piped up and he says, anybody in here built a passive house? Yeah. So I piped up and he said, how much more did you spend? I said, didn't. Well, he says, what did you spend on insulation? So I gave him a number and he started to laugh. That same engineer today is speaking totally different. Yes, I may have spent too much on insulation, but the reality is this. Here's in simple terms. At the time I was building, I think I would have looked at about $14,000 for an ordinary furnace for an ordinary house. Okay? I spent that on insulation. So that foam package that's under my house was about $8,000. It basically filled one tractor trailer load. Okay? Here's a funny side thing. I know you guys are, a lot of you have an environmental slant to you. I carefully saved all the big plastic wrappers. Those big bundles never hit the ground. Set them all aside, phoned the landfill, and I says, can I put this in my plastic container? No, you can't, George. You got to put it in the dump. It's the same kind of plastic that you have your shopping bags. I must have dumped 2,000 shopping bags in one day. Yeah, so that's the difficulty with that sort of thing.
Anybody else? Oh, come on, Jim.
Well, this is a simple question because I'm a first-time homeowner my age, and I need simple, cheap solutions. You got to talk about materials you can use that are cheap, inexpensive.
Caulking and backer rod and weather stripping. The best thing you can do for yourself is make sure that your house is not leaking heat out through air leakage. It's the least expensive item. Takes a little bit of elbow grease. Go around and assess where you're feeling drafts. Seal them up. Most of the time, that means a couple of bottles of caulking, maybe some backer rod, which is just another type of insulation, and weather stripping.
I agree with Tess here. If you own an old house and you're thinking of residing it, here's your chance. So, siding comes off. The European house wraps that are available today, the tapes that accompany them aren't cheap. At the time I was building, there was about 60 cents a foot. But how many of you are familiar with the red tape that everybody uses around town? How many of you are used to seeing Tyvek and all that kind of stuff on the outside? I'll be very blunt. It's crap. Always has been. 25 years ago, a good carpenter that I had worked with had built a home for a customer, went back 8 years later, and was asked to put an addition on. Took off the siding on the north end of the house. And there, the house wrap was split from top to bottom. They didn't know at that time, or it wasn't commonly known, if you left it out to the sun for 90 days, it would start to shrink and basically become watertight. So it shrunk over time and literally tore the paper. That tape won't last that many years, and it doesn't bond very well. If you're on an off, well, when is it dry? 8 months of the year in Port Alberni. It isn't. So when guys are putting on house wrap, they just get on with the job. The stuff doesn't stick. The European tapes are pressure sensitive, and they're basically a latex base. When I received my first sample from it, there's two companies that you should become familiar with: Small Planet Supply and 475. There are two companies in the Lower Mainland. That's where I obtained my air-to-air exchanger and all my house wrap materials. They sent me a sample kit. I took it out to the shop and I put this strip of tape that they had sent me, and it was 60 cents a foot, or about $100 a roll. And I went and pulled it, and I pulled it right out. I thought, I've been ripped. So I went back and read the instructions. No, you're supposed to rub it. So I rubbed it. Went in the house. Next morning I went out. I couldn't get it off. That stuff has a long life. We're talking 50-year, 100-year tapes. So the wrap system on my home is worth about $1,500 in material. That's not very much money, but I can tell you right now, on any house, that will make a difference. If you did nothing else, 15 to 30% difference on your heat bill, just by getting it tight. So I'll give you an idea how tight my house is. Tess talked about, was it 17 air changes per hour? 17. Okay. My house was tested. It came in at 0.28 air changes per hour, or in other words, 28% of the entire volume of air in the house left the house in 1 hour. Tess had the entire volume of the house in about 4 minutes go out of the house. The passive house standard is 0.6 air changes per hour, or 60% of the volume of air in your home go out of the home in an environment where you would have a 20-mile-an-hour wind pressing against the house, or a 20-mile-an-hour wind effect leaving the house. That's what that blower door test. It's a big fan. It pressurizes the house to determine where the leakage is. So here's an interesting thing too. Not everything is easy when you build your first passive house. So they do what they call a mid-construction blower door test to determine if you're on the right track. So I hired a specialist to come in from Nanaimo with special equipment, similar to what Tess probably owns. And he said, this is my second passive house that I'm going to test. So he installed his stuff, and I had the building inspector with me there, and I had a guy from PCIT there. The test was going really well, and he said to me, George, you have nothing to worry about. If I see my preliminary numbers, you don't have nothing to worry about. I had been at that point going around the house with a smoke detector. What do you call it? Not a smoke detector. Yeah, smoke pencil, to see if there were any leaks. And I found a few, and I dealt with those. He left. He sent me the results. I'm good to go. I then complete the house, bring in a specialist again to test the HRV equipment and balance it, and to do a blower door test. My blower door test came in at 0.63. The standard is 0.6. I was really upset. What happened? Because the number that had been delivered at mid-construction was lower. So I got a house that's 95% complete. What am I going to do? So I put cardboard coverage over the entire floor, all over my new cabinets, covered all my windows, sills, you name it, anything where something could drop on it. And I brought in a company from the Comox Valley. There's a new product called Aero Barrier. And what it is, it's a latex mist. And what they do is they set up a stand in every room and you pressurize the house and this stuff squirts out of the head and it is drawn to wherever there is a possible leak and gradually it seals it. So I went from 0.63 to 0.28 in a matter of 2 hours and 3 days of work, prepping the house and cleaning it up. So that's a learning curve. So here's another one of those things. That can be done on older houses as well. And it's done more often. So there for about $1 a square foot, you can do some sealing with that. It will seal a hole up to, I think, about this diameter. Yeah, a little bit bigger actually, yeah. So quite a big gap. So that's an opportunity. If you've got an old house and you want to upgrade the attic, here's a thought. Vacuum out, take all the insulation out of the attic, and bring in a specialist who can spray 2-pound foam, and you will get a total seal. You'll get a vapor barrier and all of that. And for every inch that you spray, you'll have an R value of about R6 or R7. And you will be going very quickly towards the passive house standard because you're going to get a 100% seal. But this is what I don't like about this stuff. And the jury's still out on that. Is it a health problem? So basically, it's taking a pound of soybeans and dumping it in a gallon of oil and mixing it and spraying it. Now I got another question for you is, when that house is at the end of its service life, what are you going to do with it? Because you can't separate the two. Can you burn it or are you going to bury it? So you make choices.
Hi there. I just wanted to come up and say thanks a lot for this presentation, you guys. There's clearly a whole ton of knowledge in this room, and yeah, I've been really inspired to do a lot of very necessary work on a very old house. So thanks a lot. I don't really have a question or comment. Beyond that, I also just wanted to make a quick plug for one of the funding programs. You guys talked a little bit about that. I'm part of an organization in town, the Alberni Air Quality Council, and in partnership with the regional district, we administer a wood stove exchange program. You can get up to $750 to $1,000 in rebates for exchanging an older non-CSA certified wood stove with something that is cleaner burning, like for instance a heat pump. So in addition to the kind of cost savings and the energy savings you get through that, there's a benefit to the air quality as well. So again, if you want to talk to me about that, I'm going to be here for a while. So thank you guys again, and have a good night.
Tessa, I wonder if you just give us a few words about Clean BC and some of these new federal programs. And then I also wonder if there's any merit in having a wee bit of discussion about the step code. I noticed that BC Housing are putting the new projects that they're involved in town, and there's certainly 3 or 4 of them by the sound of it, are only going to step 3, Mike. And I wondered, why do you think that they've been so reluctant to go further than that? So let's start with that one, and then we'll go to the programs.
Well, to answer the question about step 3 is that's what's in the code at this point. And BC Housing appears to be a little bit reluctant to take on something that hasn't been proven before or isn't part of the original plan. So when we, partway through our plan, found out that there was some federal money available through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and we could have our building turned into a net zero building. It wasn't possible to do it with BC Housing because they had already put aside the money for the plan, they'd already accepted the plan, and they didn't want to change something partway through, even though it was newly available and it would create all these benefits for society and benefits for the building. So if you do want to do something like that as a BC Housing project, and I just read today that their new ministry is going to be set up with a budget of $1.9 billion. Make sure that you have your complete plan, including all of these environmental energy saving benefits right from the very beginning. Don't try and change it partway through because it's just too difficult for the permission process to react that quickly to things.
So just to kind of follow up a little bit on that and your question about the BC Energy Step Code. So as an energy advisor, I work in both residential new construction and renovation. We spoke a lot tonight about renovation, but I do work in the new construction field as well. The BC government and the Building Safety Standards branch that runs all of the energy efficiency and other building codes, has put forth a proposal. They are expecting to implement at step 3 for part 9 homes and step 2 for part 3 homes. Part 9 are residential, part 3 are commercial and large multifamily and schools, that sort of thing. Step 3 is halfway through the steps that were suggested for the BC Energy Step Code. So there are 5 steps in total. They implemented, or they incentivized people starting at step 1, which was essentially building to your typical standards, just with the use of an energy advisor so that builders could get comfortable with the process, and then incrementally going up in energy efficiency from there, with the goal of hitting step 5 by 2032, which will be approximately 80% more efficient than code minimum houses nowadays, and what they call net zero ready, which Mike kind of talked about a little bit earlier, where a home, if it had its own power generation, could generate enough energy or more than what it's actually going to use. Very excited to see that happen in our community. To be honest, we are one of the laggards. There are only a few municipalities left on the island that haven't adopted step code into their bylaws already. So there are a lot of practice builders out there right now that we haven't had a chance to really have in our community. And so I'm excited to see it happen with our builders in our town and see how they grow. So that's great. In terms of rebates, there is quite a bit of funding available. And depending on where you go for that funding and what your avenues are, there are literally tens of thousands of dollars of rebates and grants available. And then there are loans on top of that. And then on top of that, there are rebates from your mortgage and from CMHC for retrofitting and for building for energy efficiency. So betterhomesbc.ca is the best resource to find up-to-date information on each one of those renovation upgrades and rebates that are available. There's a couple new ones that I'd like to talk about a little bit more. The first one is the income qualified program. So that is through Clean BC, so provincial. They are offering, I think it's up to $33,000 in rebates or up to 95% of the cost of the rebates or cost of the upgrades as for people that are at certain income thresholds. And actually those thresholds are pretty decent. And they take into account how many people you have in your family. So I would definitely check that out. I've worked with a couple of clients here in town now that have gotten excellent energy efficiency upgrades from them. What's beautiful about that program in particular is that they put the money out directly to the contractor. And so you have as the homeowner, have very little upfront costs to get these upgrades done. So for example, we just worked on one where it was a heat pump and a heat pump hot water tank. I believe the bill was going to come to something like $17,000. The gentleman just didn't have the money. I mean, that's reasonable. It's a lot. But with the program, he was able to pay $2,000 or $3,000 and get all of these upgrades done. And he didn't have to fork out for the deposit for the HVAC company. And he didn't have to put in all that extra cost up front to be able to reap the benefits right away. And I think that's really important as we look at the cost of ownership of a home and especially of purchasing right now, being able to access things that help us get that energy improvement so that our bills aren't as high, so we can have a better quality of life because we are not beholden to the homes that we live in. So that's one of the really nice new ones that's available from Clean BC. It also has, and I brought one of the consent forms. I think we saw a few hands of landlords in the room. It also has an option. It's kind of a tricky situation, but it's interesting. It also has an option for your tenant to apply for the program with you as the landlord signing off saying that you're comfortable with them having these renovations done on your property. I can see how that can be challenging for some, but it's also very beneficial to you as the homeowner for that property. You get to have these energy efficiency upgrades done to the house, which increase your house value, make your tenant much more comfortable living in the home. They get a more comfortable home to live in and they get lower energy bills as a result. So depending on how you worded whatever contract you had with your tenant, it could be an incredible opportunity for you. So then on the federal side, just last week, they announced an extra incentive. So there's the Canada Greener Homes Grant, which is up to $5,000 in flat out money to help you with energy efficiency upgrades in your home. A lot of my clients are taking that on to install a heat pump. Some of them are doing it for windows or insulation. Some of them are doing it for a bunch of little things, and it all adds up to that $5,000. What they have done recently, they've heard some feedback about the prohibitive upfront costs of installing heat pumps. And so specifically for homeowners that have oil heat right now, they are offering an extra $5,000 that gets paid out immediately to the homeowner if they have an oil furnace right now and they're going to go and make that jump to a heat pump. So you apply for that right off the bat. That funding gets issued within 5 days of you being approved for the program. You give that to your HVAC company, and then you also can get $5,000 from the Canada Greener Homes Grant. And then if it was oil, you'd actually still be able to access $6,000 provincially for that as well. So you're now looking at, what is that, $16,000 in rebate and grant money available to you if you had an oil furnace to make the switch to a heat pump.
Something interesting what has arisen. Steps 1 through 3 have no real economic benefit for the homeowner. So if you're going to spend money, you want to go to step 4. Now, the other thing is we got a workforce that needs to be trained. Mike, you talked to me at that meeting. Can you describe what happened about that installation learning curve?
Yeah, in order to put the insulation install the insulation on the Maitland Street Village, there's a particular way that the insulation needed to go on to ensure that there was no thermal bridge from the inside to the outside. And there's these long screws, I guess, they have to be put on to hold the insulation in place. So the person who was the construction supervisor said, okay, well, this is the way I've learned how to do it. I learned this at BCIT, and this is the way the manufacturer described to me that we should do this, and so on and so forth. And he set the crews, who are all local people, he set them to work. And they weren't getting done very quickly that first day. It was taking them a long time to follow the process as he was describing it. And then day 2, they got twice as much work done. And then day 3, they got twice as much done again. And so the crews said to him, hey, come and have a look. We've figured out a different way to install this that's much more efficient. And by all of us working together, we can get way more done. So here we have an example of people who are actually in the trenches, as it were, can figure out a better way to do this stuff and still maintain the energy efficiency and achieve all of those goals that they're trying to achieve. So working together, we learn from each other. It's a really interesting story from these guys.
I have another story for you. We were talking just now about an organization that was basically held to a barrier by the government to put a proposal for step 3 only. But actually they want to go to step 4 or better, right? This is an interesting thing that happened in Italy. There's one of these early companies that was in the passive house movement. They bid on a federal building in Italy. It was an office complex. It had to be redone. So they just bid alongside everybody else, and they said, we'll put those, features all in the building, whatever they had asked for. But when they delivered the building, they had done all the passive house stuff. So they said to the government, now look at your energy bill. And then they told them what they had done. It was a way of convincing the group that this is the way to go. Here we sit with 30 people. 30 people could rattle the chains at City Hall and say, hey guys, why are you wasting the energy of the contractors? Why not just take them right away to step 4? Because it will have an economic benefit for the buyer. But understand, right now there's a huge resistance in the workforce because they don't understand. It's a steep curve. I know that Mike spent many years as an educator. I don't think you want to teach incrementally if you can get there in one go. And then why plug half the leaks? These houses are going to stand, like my home, should have a life of at least 200 years. The wall that was described by Mike that's on this Maitland house is basically, in some ways, almost considered a 400-year wall. So think about this. The building envelope is the first thing that goes up. It's the cheapest thing of the whole build. It is also the thing that will not be looked at for most of the life of that house. In other words, how many times have you known people to open that up unless they really are forced to? And when you just stuff a wall full of insulation and you do it right, it saves money from day one. So the day that I put the first bats in the house that I was working in, I went to short sleeves. I never worked in a sweater after that day. And it continues to save money whether the heat is on or not. That's my point. We've got a building stock that's going to be growing. And why are we doing a half-assed job of building to a low standard? So right now, for instance, there's a development behind Neil's school, built to code. Do you know what code means? It's the lowest standard that you're legally allowed to build at. In other words, it's the crappiest house you're allowed to build. So why are we doing it? There are houses back there that are framed in the same manner as I was framing in 1976. You got an 8-foot wall, 8'1" wall, and they put a sheet of OSB at the top and one at the bottom, and you got an 1.5-inch gap. Then slap some tie-back over it, tape it, put vinyl siding on it, sell it. The guy's got electric heat in there, and he's wondering why he's paying so much a month. To go from there to step 4 is not much of a reach. And the building that Mike has been with proves it.
Tessa, just a quick one. Did you attend Rob Dickinson's meeting on the 17th with the contractors?
I hosted that meeting.
Ah, congratulations. So did you
Thank
get what sort of a turnout did you get?
Oh my gosh. I was prepared for a room about this big. It was standing room only. There were over 80 people in that room. It was a very deep conversation.
Right.
And I will honestly say the mostly gentlemen that showed up for that meeting had good questions and they were excited to be learning. So I am very much looking forward to working with them as we go through this.
Right. So is the next stage then to encourage the new council to adopt the step code the same way as Courtney, Nanaimo and others have?
Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you, everyone. Very exciting ideas, and really, I think we can look forward to some new things in Port Alberni. So I think we're just going to break now. It's getting late, but these guys are totally willing to stick around. There's business cards. Mike has cards. I think also Tessa has cards. But take the opportunity to speak to them personally and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.